Hi, I'm Dr. Chris Stevens, and this is the Psychology to Live By podcast. Welcome to Psychology to Live By. Today we'll be discussing my podcast with psychologist Kati Morton, and joining me on this roundtable are three people from Network Music who I might say really have things under pretty good control. So I welcome Terry McBride, CEO, Chris Norwood, Head of Strategy, and Karen Mix, Director of People Operations. My podcast with Kati centred on her book, Why Do I Keep Doing This? Kati's a clinical psychologist, an author, public speaker, and has a large online following. The book is largely about people who suffer with an obsessive need to control, whether that is to control their own thoughts, feelings and behaviours, but also other people's attitudes and behaviours towards them. They are people pleasers, perfectionists, self-deprecators and so on. But the book has relevance to a wider audience because we all fall into this need to control how others perceive and value us. Kati shows that such attempts at control are illusory and counterproductive. And the book is full of practical ways one can regain one's authenticity and one's own self-esteem. But it's no quick fix self-help book. The reason we keep doing this is that these are deep, automatic, often unconscious patterns of feeling, thinking and doing. The book explains the realistic and diverse strategies to gradually live more spontaneously with more self-compassion and more freedom. It's a book about learning how to let go. It was, needless to say, a stimulating and informative discussion. And speaking of stimulating and informative, welcome, my friends.
Hello.
Nice to see you, of course, and you'll pardon my terrible dad joke about you all having things under control. I really enjoyed this conversation with Kati, and I recorded a while back, and so I rewatched it, and I really enjoyed rewatching. So I'm very curious about your responses, your thoughts about our conversation.
I can start us off.
Good on you, Chris.
More almost of an observation or a light bulb moment for me in that conversation that you all had was um, the analogy about the marbles through the sand and how it creates ruts and it keeps going down the ruts because that's just sort of the easiest way. And then,
Yeah.
the Herculean effort to create a new rut of pushing the marble out of the sand and trying to do something different. I thought it was just a really good analogy for how hard it is to break through some of these patterns and habits that we develop in our lives and how ingrained they can be, but also tying that to something that an earlier part of the conversation, which was also when you guys were discussing how we pattern our behavior after what our parents model for us when we're young. And sometimes those habits that become ingrained are things maybe that we did by our own volition or intention, and sometimes it's just our observations of the world around us and how that can imprint those strong patterns also. I thought was just such an interesting takeaway, insight into how our
Yeah.
brains work and how hard it can be to make them, to reformat them when the time is right or when the need is there.
Yeah, there's a lot there, Chris. One of the things that distinguishes our species from other species is that we're highly mimetic. We copy, and little, young humans, they start copying almost straight as soon as they're born. And it's and as such, it's an unconscious process, right? We learn a language, we learn all the intonations and the shapes of the sounds just by copying. And so, of course, that applies to everything that is human. And I know you've got young children, and you no doubt have heard your parents' voice in your voice, right?
Yep.
And so there's lots of ways that conditioning reveals itself. Yeah, and then that just gets laid down, and those ruts are formed. In the sand, as it were, which of course is an analogy for the way that whatever we practice becomes instantiated in neural networks. And the more you run a neural network, the more efficient it becomes. The more it's practiced, it's like it transmits faster and more widely and more and it's in terms of conservation of energy, which is a really fundamental principle of human beings. It's why we're fundamentally lazy. We will tend to go down the most used pathways because they're easier. However, if we're suffering, and I think this was a really important part of our conversation, actually, and I talked about how the intellect is important, having a framework of understanding, because why would you want to put yourself through the pain and suffering of forming new ruts, pushing the marble out of the rut in the sand, as it were? Well, the big motive is that we're suffering. But also there's hope. There's a sense in which, maybe there's another way of living. Maybe I don't have to go up and down in this rut. And I remember Katie talking about when she was a kid staying at a friend's place whose family was very loud. And, that was in the context of her explaining to me that in her family, no, there were never arguments, which was not necessarily a good thing. Things weren't spoken about, and the implicit message was one shouldn't ever disagree or argue, that it's too dangerous or something, right? But anyway, it lodged in her mind, of course, that other people live very different ways, and it's not necessarily problematic. So once we start to develop an awareness that I'm actually in a rut, that this is not reality, capital R, full stop, this is the truth, that in fact this might actually be a very deep habit, that intellectually that brings a sense of hope that there might be a good reason to be pushing against the grain in this way, to be trying to utilize neuroplasticity by practicing in and experimenting new and perhaps better ways of being. Yeah. So, it's as you said, Chris, it's a nice analogy, and it does stick in the mind. I've heard similar ones, where they talk about, when skiers go down a path and they ski,
Mm-hmm.
and a path forms there, and other skiers follow that path, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's lots of these analogies to try to capture this phenomenon. But very interesting. And the other aspect of this is this distinction between this sort of intellectual understanding and the way we feel. It's more natural and more me to be the other way. Am I making that? Yeah. And it's very convincing how we feel, and it's like it's always trying to persuade us not to change. And it doesn't feel as real when we begin practicing new ways of being, right? Because it just doesn't roll in the way. Yeah,
it feels not natural. Yeah,
that's right. And eventually it does, and that's the wonderful thing. If you practice something long enough, I think I said to her, at one point, we become what we do. And this opens up a big question too of I've often thought about psychology in terms of all these things we don't know. It's like we're scratching the surface, and we and so on. But then I sometimes flip that, and I think, God, what a wonderful thing that there are some things we know. And for example, we know this, that if you practice something over and over, it gets instantiated in our neural architecture, and it starts to feel natural. That's such powerful knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And that civilization and the learnings of great thinkers and philosophers and artists and scientists, that these things can suggest to us, here's a great way to live. And if you practice it, you'll have, you follow the tenets of a religion or of Buddhism or of psychology. The promise is you can live a happier life. And it's not based on nothing, it's based on quite a lot. And I think that's the way we stand on the shoulders of giants, and that gives us the confidence to do this hard yakka. Oh, you wouldn't know what the word yakka means, would you? That's an Australianism for hard work. Otherwise we wouldn't do it. We wouldn't have. So that's one half of it, and the other half is, did you notice the number of times Katie talked about her therapist? When there were multiple therapists.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, I just so admire people like Katie, because you can see the ground she's made. She is a really good example of what we're talking about here. That you really can. I was going to say remake yourself, but I think it's probably more uncover oneself in that sense of authenticity she spoke about. And those therapists were very important to her. That's the other piece here. That how do we get out of these ruts? Well, often we need another person to hold us long enough and encourage us to keep going. And if we trust them, we will do that. So that's a big part of the therapeutic adventure, I think. So, thank you, Chris. Very good, as always. What about you other two? What's going on?
Well, I think you just set up my question.
Good.
The concept of the layers of self that you guys talked about, I thought that was really interesting. So, as a therapist, Dr. Chris, if I am a people-pleasing perfectionist who gets hypothetically speaking,
yes.
Speaking for a friend.
Yeah. My friend Jane.
I had to write this one down because I was like, oh, this is, yeah. If I have a people-pleasing perfectionist who gets defensive when the mirror's held up on like those recurring behaviors, how would you counsel me to lessen anxiety?
Wow. Okay.
We have a new winner for curliest here, I think.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so just tell me, when does the anxiety enter?
Well, so when we're talking about I think the overarching concept of being in control of, and why do I keep doing this? That like, so I'm people pleasing, but I'm also using I as third person, a perfectionist. But like if you're being, I like the mirror held up on like, you keep doing these things over and over again, and it creates anxiety, perhaps because you can't control the situation or you're not getting the outcomes that you want. A lot of this, it brought me to the very popular book Let Them by Mel Robbins, that the like same conceptual sort of thing. So if there's anxiety arises because you can't control the situation, how would you counsel to deal with that?
Okay, all right. And just before I jump in, just one little clarification. The mirror being held up, what's the mirror? Like, is that other people
Well,
telling
like,
you,
yeah,
or what?
somebody pointing it out to you, or you being held accountable to, like, why do you keep doing this? And it might be yourself holding the mirror up to
The
yourself.
mirror up to yourself.
But
Okay, I got it.
yeah.
Okay, so this is, in a sense, this is the core of Katie's book. Why do I keep doing this? And so the idea is, she has an intellectual understanding, and the bloody pattern just keeps repeating. All right, and so there's a little nuance here, though, that does a lot of heavy lifting. It doesn't seem like much at first. And you remember her, well, I don't know if it was her first or second therapist said, you got to feel your way through this, right? And our natural desire is always, well, I don't want to have this feeling anymore. So when the feeling, like in this case, anxiety, so when the feeling arises, I think, well, I'm failing again, right?
Yeah.
That's the error. It's one of those things where you think, okay, I'm doing all this work so that I'm not so anxious. So if the anxiety is arising, I must be failing, right? No, it's like saying I'm going to be a meditator, and I'll be a failed meditator if my mind keeps being distracted. Wrong. The process of meditation is learning about the nature of one's mind, and being distracted is a part of the nature of everyone's mind. So it's changing our relationship to the anxiety rather than necessarily wishing it away. So the ego is a really cunning little bugger.
It sure is.
Because what happens is, perfectionism is ego driven, right? It's like, I'm worried all the time about, am I good enough, and people like me, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's all about self-concern. So when the anxiety comes up, when you're starting to question whether you need to be perfectionistic, the ego goes, aha, I'm going to use the existence of the anxiety to put the crown back on my head and run the show again. Okay, so it's subtle. It's a nuance here about actually being interested in the anxiety rather than afraid of it. Actually, paying attention to it, and then shifting. Remember I spoke with her for a little bit there about defusing.
Yes, yeah.
Shifting the identity from identifying with the anxiety. So it's like, there's my friend anxiety again, rather than, oh, fuck, I'm getting nowhere, I'm hopeless, I'm bad, I'm this, I'm that. That's the ego taking control again.
Yeah.
What's left if we're not operating out of ego? It's this reflexive awareness. And it's not egoic in the sense, it's just this natural curiosity. It's a non-judgmental, completely accepting, paying attention.
Right.
And when anxiety is looked at in that way, it begins to dissolve. Not because you're trying to make it dissolve. This is one of those, little paradoxes things. It's like, if you're trying to make it go away, you'll make more of it. But paradoxically, if we can accept it and then shift back and then think, does this anxiety have any purchase on reality? Is it helping me in any way? Well, no. Does it really matter that I've got some anxiety in my body? Not really. What should I now shift my attention to? Right. And now you're in a position where you can shift attention because you're not identified with the feeling. And you have to practice that over and over and over and over and over.
Yeah.
And what happens over time is you shorten what I call the half-life of the anxiety. So, this notion of a half-life, if you drink coffee, I think after 2 hours, certain percent's gone, and after another 2 hours. So the job is not to get rid of anxiety. It's over time to reduce its half-life.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember reading a book many years ago about, people across the ages who had reached enlightenment. And the idea of the book was to try to get a sense of what their life was post-enlightenment. And one of the intriguing things, if I remember the book correctly, was that these enlightened people, and it's all relative, but these enlightened people, if they were a cranky person before, they were still cranky afterwards. But with this, the crankiness arose and then was gone. Do you know what I mean? So their nature didn't change. If they were an anxious person, there'd be a little spurt. We're still human. You still get triggered by things, but then almost as soon as it arises, it passes away. It's like we become Teflon for the negative emotions, but not by trying to eradicate them.
By accepting them. That is fascinating, because like when you do approach those situations more as an observer, it almost becomes easier to deal.
Yeah, because and this, we only just started that conversation towards the end of the podcast about the nature of self, and because like who's doing the observing and who's having the anxiety, and they are kind of distinct. And so the ego is this thing that operates in I keep threatening to do a podcast on the ego, but it frightens me, quite frankly, because it's a
bit of a frightening topic for sure. Yeah.
But it's this. That's what we mostly identify with, is this constant stream of consciousness that automatically runs, that we don't even choose. And the Kati was talking about all these assumptions and narratives that we just imbibe. What Chris was talking about.
Totally. Yeah.
But there's this other and perhaps more real, more authentic self, which is contentless. It doesn't have a narrative. It's just this way of being completely present. And I think that's the thing we're looking for, to have less and less self-consciousness, less and less egoic fixation. And then emotions can come and go. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's it. That's anxiety feeds the ego. Like that's.
Yeah. Well, the ego will use anything it can.
Yeah.
To maintain its hegemony. Right. So we all have to suffer some sort of ego death, I think, in order to be more sustainably happy. But it's for some people it's cataclysmic, but for most people it's hopefully a gradual process. Yeah. Terry.
So you've covered off a lot already, but it's when she talked about arguments being swept under the rug, that was how I grew up. That's the household that I grew up.
All right.
And then 5 doors down at a friend's house, arguments sometimes, were solved by physical, like a punch or something.
Yeah.
Especially, teenagers, radically different.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think either of those is good, frankly. but that was kind of the reality of the time when I grew up. So there's that thought that really stuck with me. The analogy of the pufferfish was really interesting. And also just the actual start of the whole thing, where she wanted to write a book about an eating disorder, and it's not about the fucking food. It's about all the emotional versus the intellectual conversation when it comes to food. So there were so many things, and watching the two of you was like you were doing a therapy session with each other, right? It was was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, I think that's why I enjoyed rewatching it because
Oh yeah, because we're like doing the session again.
well, yeah, also I wasn't aware. I was just in the conversation with her, but now I'm looking at the conversation and thinking,
Yeah.
oh, look at these two psychologists go.
Well, you were both giving the other a therapy session without
just
knowing
riffing.
that's what was
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah, and we're
An
also
outside observer, like,
I know it was like a game of tennis, wasn't it?
it's crazy.
I know, but I think we were also stress testing each other's therapeutic ideas.
But that was part of the session.
Yeah, totally. And I think
you readily switch from emotional to intellectual. Boom,
yeah.
boom, 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 boom. Right?
Yeah. And so a few things there. Let's start with the puffer fish because obviously our listeners won't know what that
What a great
means.
analogy.
Yeah, I think she's quite good with, analogies and making things understandable. So the idea of the puffer fish, is it puffs itself up, and I think it's a poisonous fish too. And it's a nice metaphor for the way in which insecure people will protect themselves by being prickly and a little bit toxic towards other people. But it's not because they feel better than other people. It's because they feel inferior. And so, because it can often be misinterpreted from the outside, this person's really arrogant or they're really, no, this is all a defense mechanism. And of course it's a trap because if you're like that, then you never let anyone close. If you never have anyone close, then that confirms you're unlovable and the pattern repeats. And I think that's another reason she's written this book. And you're right, Terry. I think she was talking to the publisher about writing a book on eating disorders, and the publisher said, "No, the real book is about control." Yeah, and so that's the theme running through this book. And I'll come back to the fighting thing in a bit. But the real theme in this book is trying to control things that aren't controllable. For example, trying to control what other people think of me, and contorting oneself. It's what we call in psychology impression management. I've forgotten the phrase she uses, but this way in which we just shape shifting, I think is what she said. Yeah. And so that's it doesn't go anywhere, and the person feels constantly inauthentic, and so you've got this lack of intimate relationship, allied with this constant feeling of inauthenticity, which then feeds again one's reluctance to be intimate, which then provides more feedback that one is unworthy. And you can see how that can just go on forever. Yeah. And it does go on forever. But at some point, as I said, there's this sort of realization, there's a pattern here. And if the suffering is enough, this is why suffering is important. It's like in a work context, what do people learn the most from? Well, their fuck ups, their mistakes, if they're going to learn from them. And well, the same is true psychologically. And anxiety, by the way, Karen, it has a function. Right. And now sometimes it gets disproportionate, but we wouldn't want to do away with anxiety entirely, nor would you want to do away with suffering, because it concentrates the mind. It motivates us to reduce the suffering. it makes us then look at, well, what is causing the suffering? And so obviously she's done that a lot over the years. And that's why, as I say, that's why we're so fortunate to be the recipients of millennia of deep thought and discoveries about what actually could make me more reliably satisfied with my existence. Yeah. Now the fighting thing, Terry, that's fascinating. It's set me to thinking about, Terry McBride, raised in a family where, conflicts were not expressed. I think you have, you've done a bit of growing in that respect, haven't you, Terry?
I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Put it this way, I'm not physical.
No, but I don't think you avoid, I'm guessing now, but you don't avoid conflict in the way that you might have when you were younger.
No, what I think where I come from is if, there's the analogy of the elephant in the room. I would rather get the elephant out. So let's just talk about it. And once the elephant's out, then you can actually get down to some really good conversations.
Yeah, exactly.
Where you don't get the elephant out, then everyone's thinking about the elephant, and as such, the work that you're doing becomes superficial.
Yeah, and to stretch that analogy a little bit, very often people's thinking about the elephant is inaccurate. They catastrophize what the consequences would be of having the conversation. So there's no, their framework, as in Katie's example, in her family, the frame was, if we talk about this, it's way too dangerous. Something dreadful is going to happen. Relationships will break down. I'll be rejected, et cetera, et cetera. Well, when you actually test that, you can often find, well, no, we actually got somewhere. We resolved. We got to the actual problem. We deepened our relationship.
Yeah, we share a mutual friend who, with inside any senior meeting, his first topic would be, what's this week's elephant? Let's just get rid of it.
Yeah.
Right.
And then you can breathe, right? Because when there's,
in some cases, it was an elephant to that person, not necessarily to everybody else. But it was still one that once it was talked out, and just changed the tone of the conversation.
Yeah, no, because there's something suffocating about the power of something that's unsaid between people.
Yeah, and any feelings of guilt or whatever, or these, or we're going to be hurt, blah 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 blah. Where if it's done in a safe environment where people know each other and have long-standing understanding of each other, then chances are you can just take the air out of the balloon quickly.
That's right. And I think this is what, when Katie was talking about authenticity, and right towards the end, we started to talk about, in a sense, beyond self. Well, a couple of things. So one is the elephant in the room stuff. That's all about self-concern.
Yep.
Right. That's what feeds it. It's this worry that there's going to be conflict and I'm going to be rejected, or it's going to be very uncomfortable or something. Right. But if we're maybe just moved along the pathway sufficiently such that we fundamentally feel like I'm okay, that the question is not everything has to be looked at through the lens of am I good enough, or it's not all about me, then problems can be discussed without this extra burden of them having to be filtered through. Am I going to be rejected? Yeah. And this is like a universal problem, right? And this is why intimacy is so difficult. And you guys might remember, one of my little metaphors or stories about this is the idea of the universal delusion, and that is that at some level I'm not good enough.
Mm.
And I think it is universal, and it needs to be worked through, so that in the end we can just relax a bit.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm okay. I'm not perfect, but like I'm good enough. And I'd rather play in life rather than have everything being a measure of whether I'm good enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think you three are good enough.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. And, and that's partly what I like about our conversations, right? People, you've got points of view, but there's not much ego going on here. It's more like it's an inquiry, right? And a discussion, and there's appropriate self-deprecation and deprecation of each other.
We've known each other for decades.
This is true. This is true.
We've already done our dances.
I think what you're saying is we're getting older. Yeah.
I think, us three, and obviously Colleen too, we're just comfortable within our relationships with each other, that we can kind of say what we're thinking, and it'll be taken as non-judgmental, right?
Yeah. And I think, just to bring this together and to finish, that's, I think, is the message of Katie's book, is you get to a point where the question of self starts to drop out.
Yeah.
Right. And you shift more into being rather than having to perform to get a certain result.
Mm-hmm.
You get to relax, in fact, into one's life.
Yeah.
So I think that's the,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. All right, my friends, as always, thank you so much. And we will touch base soon to record another one of these unpredictable conversations. Okay. You've been listening to the Psychology to Live By podcast. If you like the podcast and want to know more, my website is www.drchris.life. There you'll find links to my various social media posts, a newsletter, and lots more. And share the podcast with people you like so they can like it too. And a little more cello and guitar from the wonderful duo Desire and Date.